Good evening, and thank you very much, Dr. Liddell, for the invitation to come here. Can you hear me okay? Is this loudspeaker system working? Can I start by just asking who is not familiar with general Theravada teachings? You know, if you follow different schools, just put your hand up if you're. Okay, that's fine, so I just know what to mention or not mention. So the topic is Abhidhamma as taught or as found in the Theravada school. And in Theravada Buddhism, the teachings have been divided up into three baskets or pitakas. The Vinaya Pitaka contains all of the Buddha's teachings concerning monastic life, their code of behavior, the rules they have to follow, and so forth. The Sutta Pitaka contains all of the Buddha's discourses, his sermons, given to a variety of different people on a great many different subjects. Then the Abhidhamma Pitaka contains what is sometimes called more abstract teaching. In the Abhidhamma Pitaka there are 7 books, some of which are very complex. But we're also very fortunate that a monk called Anuruddha, sometime between the 5th and the 12th centuries, wrote what is called the Abhidhamma Sangha. This has been translated into English twice. The first was by Venerable Narada, and he called it a manual of Abhidhamma, and then Bhikkhu Bodhi called his version a comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. They both cover the same ground. If anyone is interested to delve deeper, then I can highly recommend one or both of these books, although I must warn you, they're not always easy reading. Tradition has it that the Buddha contemplated the Abhidhamma during the 4th week after his enlightenment. But it wasn't until 7 years later that he taught it. He decided he would teach it to his mother as an act of gratitude. His mother had died 1 week after giving birth to him, but she had been reborn in one of the heavenly planes. And the Buddha wished to give the entire Abhidhamma teaching in one unbroken session. An earthly day is not long enough for that, but it is said that if he was able to ascend into a heavenly plane, he could accomplish the entire teaching in one heavenly day, and each earthly night he returned to the earth and he passed on to his chief disciple Sariputta what it was that he'd been teaching that day. So it is Sariputta who is credited with formalizing this teaching that we now have. The purpose of the Abhidhamma is to help us to develop right understanding of 2 important vital parts of the doctrine. The first is the doctrine of impermanence, or anicca, and the second is the doctrine of no permanent soul or self, the doctrine of anatta. Buddhaghosa, who was, and still is, a very famous commentator on the Buddha's teachings, he wrote in a commentary on one of the books of the Abhidhamma, he said, "And tradition has it that those monks only who know Abhidhamma are true preachers of Dhamma. The rest, though they speak on the Dhamma, are not preachers thereof." And why? They, in speaking on the Dhamma, confuse the different kinds of karma and its results, the distinction between mind and matter, and the different kinds of states, or dhammas. The students of Abhidhamma do not thus get confused. Hence, a monk who knows Abhidhamma, whether he preaches the Dhamma or not, will be able to answer questions whenever asked. He alone, therefore, is a true preacher of the Dhamma. The word Abhidhamma is the word Abhi means higher or supplementary or special. This is not in any way to infer that the teachings we find elsewhere are in some sense inferior or unsatisfactory. But in the Abhidhamma, the analysis of the Abhidhamma is very fine and very detailed, which we don't find in the suttas. So the purpose of studying the Abhidhamma is the same purpose that we have for studying any other part of the Buddha's teachings, which the Buddha explained as, he said, "I teach just dukkha and the ending of dukkha." So the Abhidhamma fulfills that function very much. And the purpose is particularly to understand by way of analysis and by way of synthesis. So the Abhidhamma is in some ways going further in more in-depth analysis than you find in the suttas. And here we need to make a little distinction between two kinds of truth. What we call conventional truth and ultimate truth. Conventional truth is based upon general agreed practice. Using the English language, we can call something a chair, and we all know what we mean by a chair. But we could give it another name if we wanted to. And also, the chair could be broken down into constituent parts. If we talk about sunrise or sunset, that's just a convention. Very useful. If I say I'll see you tomorrow morning at sunrise, we will know what we're talking about. But the sun hasn't risen, the sun hasn't moved around at all. But by convention, we call it sunrise. And this kind of conventional truth is very useful. It's the truth we use in everyday language, and it's the truth that the Buddha used in his suttas. He would talk about you and me. If you perform that action, you will receive the karmic consequences of that action. Or he would say, when I was only an unenlightened bodhisattva. He talks about I and you and me. And that's fine. But these terms are simply convenient, conventional terms. The Buddha gives the example of a cow. You say we have a cow, we all know what we mean by cow, but when the cow butcher has done his work, where is your cow? Well, you've got this collection of bits and pieces. You don't have your cow anymore. So that was just a convention to call somebody or something a cow. By the same token, a chariot is just made up of a lot of different parts, or a motor car is made up of a lot of different parts. So in the Abhidhamma, we focus on 4 ultimate truths, which are achieved or explained by way of an analysis. The ultimate truths are citta, or consciousness, cetasika, or mental qualities, mental concomitants, rupa, material form, and nibbana. Citta is analysed into 89 different kinds. Cetasika into 52 kinds, rupa into 28 kinds. Beyond that, you cannot go further. That is the ultimate as far as analysis is concerned. You cannot break down any of these beyond the numbers you've got there on board. But the Abhidhamma is also not only an analysis, but it is a synthesis, which means that all the different qualities which are described by analysis are shown not to exist in isolation. They can only exist in dependence upon something else. So there is the doctrine of dependent origination, or conditioned genesis, and there's also an explanation of 24 different forms of conditionality. The Abhidhamma is not totally different from the suttas in the sense that they're all teaching the same thing, and there are many parallels with the Abhidhamma found in the suttas. For those of you who know the Dhammapada, think of the first 2 verses in the Dhammapada. All mental states have mind as their former. Mind is chief, mind made are they. If one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then unhappiness follows one, as the cart follows the hoof of the draft ox. And all mental states have mind as their forerunner. Mind is chief, mind made are they. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, then happiness follows up, even as one's shadow. So that is a summary of the Abhidhamma. So to explain anything properly requires not only that it be analysed into its constituent parts, but the relationship between these parts has also to be explained. Now that's all very theoretical. Let's look at some ways in which this analysis takes place. The first ultimate truth is citta. That equates to the 5th of the 5 aggregates called vijnana. Anybody not clear on what is an aggregate, the 5 aggregates, the khandhas? Okay. In Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha analysed a being, you or me, into 5 khandhas, translated as aggregate. They are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. In the Abhidhamma, he goes into a deeper explanation of these. So the 5th aggregate, consciousness, in the Abhidhamma is known by the term citta. The function of citta is simply to cognize, simply to know things. And there are 89 kinds, which we won't go into this evening, but there are various ways in which they are classified. One is according to their ethical nature. So we have a moral consciousness, which is known by the Pali term kusala, and which will generate wholesome karma. Then we have immoral consciousness, akusala, that generates unwholesome karma. Then there's a resultant. That is what is the result of the first 2. Vipaka is a result. 36 kinds of that. And then there are what we call inoperative, which means they are neither generating karma nor the result of karma. Typically, an enlightened being, his actions, her actions, do not generate fresh karma. So the actions of the enlightened being would be kriya. All the Buddha's actions from the time of his enlightenment onwards would fall into the kriya. Okay. Yes, sir.
From what you said, I've never understood what it means that the Buddha's actions didn't cause fresh karma. In what way? If he was acting in a positive way, wouldn't he generate positive karma?
No, it's a good question, but the answer is no. Because to generate positive karma, we have to have the quality of an intention. The Buddha used the word chaitanya. Of course, it's better to generate positive karma than unwholesome karma. But an enlightened being is not generating intention in the same way that an unenlightened being generates intention. His actions are just naturally pure, wholesome actions. So that means he's not generating any more karma. He still had to experience, during the remainder of his life, the results of actions which he had performed previously, either in that life or in some life prior to that. But he wasn't adding any fresh karma to that story. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So, one way of classifying the citta is by the ethical nature. Then, another way is by the presence or absence of roots. Roots are what give stability to a citta. And we recognize 6. 3 wholesome and 3 unwholesome. The 3 wholesome ones, let's start the other way around. The 3 unwholesome ones are lobha, dosa and moha. Greed or attachment, hatred or aversion, and ignorance or non-understanding. And then their opposites are lobha, are dosa, are moha. That means generosity, non-attachment, goodwill, loving kindness, and understanding or wisdom. So some cittas have one or more of these roots, which of course have ethical consequences. And then a third way of classifying cittas is the sphere of arising. And I think you all have, I hope you all have, a chart of 31 planes of existence. Briefly, we can say that these are subdivided into 3 wide categories. If we start at the bottom and work upwards, first of all we have 11 planes which we call sense sphere planes, and you will find that we are tucked away in number 5. Below us are planes of suffering, such as animals and hell realms. Above that, there are 16 fine material planes, usually attained by practicing samatha meditation using a material object, like a kasina. And these are subdivided into various planes of jhana. And above them there are 4 planes which are immaterial. They don't use a material object. So these are called immaterial or arupa. Rupa means material, arupa means immaterial. So look at this chart here. There are 89 kinds of citta. 54 of them can arise in the sensuous sphere, 15 in the form sphere, and 12 in the formless sphere. And then, off the chart, there are what we call supramundane. And these relate to the cittas of beings who have entered what we call the stages of sainthood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, but we have a stream enterer, a once returner, a non-returner, and an enlightened being. They are not shown on this 31 planes. Now, beings can either develop these kinds of citta whilst still here in this life by practicing certain kinds of meditation. But it is also possible, if somebody's a habitual and skilled practitioner, that rebirth may take place in one of these planes. And that is why on the right-hand side of the sheet you have a lifespan allotted to each of the planes. I wanted to go into a little greater depth. We don't have time to do everything in depth, but I wanted to go into a little bit of greater depth here concerning the process of cognition. And please look at what I think is the first sheet or the first page on the handout you have there. When you look and see something, or hear and identify something, taste something, smell something, touch something, what has taken place? How is it that you know that, oh, I'm looking at the door, I'm looking at the light, or I'm hearing the sound of a car? This is a matter of a process taking place, and there are 17 identifiable stages in this process. The state of the mind which arises at birth is called bhavanga. We don't have an English equivalent. It's made of two words, bhava and anga. Bhava means to become, anga is a limb. So you can call this a limb of becoming. That doesn't mean very much either in English. So it is sometimes translated as a life continuum. Bhavanga starts to flow at the moment of conception, and it continues to flow until the moment of death. But it is constantly interrupted when a conscious thought process takes place. So when the mind is in a state of sleep or a coma, then bhavanga is flowing on. But when one of the sense doors, we talk about eye door, ear door, nose door, tongue door, body door, when one of these doors is stimulated by coming into contact with its appropriate object, then this process of 17 thought moments is put into motion. So bhavanga is what preserves our individuality. It's not one unending stream or a solid stream. It's one thought moment followed by another thought moment followed by another. And each thought moment conditions the next thought moment. This is what preserves our individual identity. So in this scheme of things, number one, past bhavanga. For the purposes of this chart, it has to be shown there's only one, but actually it's many, 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 many millions of these occur in a second. But then bhavanga is stimulated by a vibration, a bit like a fly blundering into a cobweb, sets up a vibration. And this arrests the bhavanga. Bhavanga flow stops. And then a kind of consciousness arises which is turning towards the particular sense door which has been stimulated. So you can have an eye door consciousness, ear door consciousness, nose door, tongue door and body door. And then, depending on that, arises a sense consciousness. Pancha means 5. So it can be visual consciousness, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. For this to happen, there must be an object. We cannot have any kind of consciousness unless there is an object. And once the object is there, it must be one of these 5 kinds of consciousness. At this moment, the object is not identified properly. It's just a dull awareness that one particular sense door has been stimulated. Then we have a receiving consciousness and an investigating consciousness.
I noticed that one is called citta and the other is called vijnana.
Indeed. A good question. That is just the way the body turns out. I don't know why they've chosen vijnana for stage number 5, because most of this is all to do with citta. It may be that the same term is also found in the suttas for visual consciousness and gustatory consciousness.
Sometimes translated as heart, don't they? Vijnana, citta.
Do they?
Mind of heart.
Citta is translated as heart.
In Malayalam.
Really?
Mind heart.
That's a very slightly contentious matter in Theravada Buddhism. Where is the heart? The Buddha didn't say. He just said that material thing on which consciousness depends. And some commentators say, yes, this is the heart. Other people say it's up in the head. Other people say it is every cell in the body. So we don't really know.
Well, I think that's a very good explanation.
So when we get to number 8, before we get to number 8, up to that point, this has been a passive series of events. We cannot control that. As long as we have an eye or an ear or a nose which is working properly, this process will take place. But at number 8, very important moment, because here a decision is made. The object has now been identified, and now the question arises, what is to be done concerning this object? If it's a nice object, something we've identified as pleasant, we may well respond with desire, craving, attachment. If it's an unpleasant object, we may respond with aversion and dislike. But this is the point at which we can take the initiative and decide. And then from here onwards, there are these states we call javana, or impulsion. This is where karma is generated. So, if we want to generate wholesome karma or unwholesome karma, we have to make the right decision at number 8, votapanna. So if somebody should be treating you badly, or speaking to you badly, abusing you, insulting you, that's what you identify in the first half of this process. But then at number 8, you decide, what am I going to do? Am I going to react in an unskillful way, which would be to respond with a lot of abuse of my own to get my own back, in which case the jhavana stages would all be generating unwholesome karma. Or do I decide I'm going to respond with patience, kindness, compassion, etc., and respond in a skillful way? If I do that, then I'm generating wholesome karma. So this is where number 8, the Vokapana stage, is so important. After that jhavana process, will follow 2 more thought moments where this is registered. Memory is done here. After that, the mind or citta reverts to the bhavanga state, and that continues to flow on and on and on and on and on until another of these thought processes arises. These things take place so rapidly that we cannot identify them one by one. Millions of these take place in a split second. But this is all there is. There is no body, no person, no me behind all this, organising it, pulling strings and deciding what's going to happen next. This is all there is in the process.
Yes, I was just thinking about the Buddha's telling us to guard the sense doors. And on the one hand, I hear you saying that this is involuntary and we don't have any control of it. I'd like you to tell me about what part we do have control over, and is it meditation?
Good question. We do have control, and that control is the other half of the process, which is called cetasika, which we'll come to in just a moment. The citta simply cognizes. There are no other qualities. But the cetasikas are what impart qualities like attention, like manasikara, attention and decision, which we'll cover in just a moment. So this process shows us 2 things. One, impermanence. You will not find anything here that lasts for more than a split second. And there is no permanent I or me behind this process controlling it. There's a further kind of perception which takes place if it arises purely through the mind door. Up to this point, we were talking about only the external senses. The eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. But it is also possible to have what is called a mind door process. And there are 2 sorts. One is called a consequent process because it arises consequent to the external process which you just looked at. And there is also an independent process which arises purely in mind. So the consequent process is to reflect on what has just been cognized by one of our senses. This means we identify the object more clearly. We know better what it is that we've just what we've just heard, or tasted, or touched. But it is also possible that a citta can arise purely in the mind door, nothing to do with any of the external doors at all. This citta could be based on something we have previously experienced and which we have perceived, but now we develop it in some way and we see something, or we put something extra into it. Or it can be a form of citta which arises as a result of some information you may have been given by others. Or it can be a purely abstract thought, like, say, an original thought. That doesn't have to go through any of the external senses. And this process is similar to the 17 thought moments, except for only 12. It has a vibrating bhavanga and a resting bhavanga, and then instead of the Pancha-Vajana, we have the mind door, cognition, followed by the impulsions and the registration process, and then mind revert to bhavanga. Now, the second ultimate truth is Chaitasika. This, in the aggregates, identifies with the second, third and fourth aggregates, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara. Chaitasika and citta are so closely intertwined, interwoven, very difficult to separate them, but they arise, Chaitasikas arise with the citta, they perish with that citta, they take the same object, visible object, gustatory object, and they arise in the same plane, the karma, the sense sphere planes, the fine material or the formless planes. And these are classified into 52 kinds. 7 are universals. And if you'd like to look at it, I think it's a third of these sheets. There are 7 universal kinds. They must be present with every kind of citta. Contact, feeling, perception, intention, one-pointedness, life faculty or energizing faculty, and attention. The next 6 may be present, but they don't have to be present. Initial thought, sustained thought, determination, energy, rapture, and wish. All these first 13 are called ethically indeterminate, or ethically variable. They take on their ethical quality from the citta. If the citta is a wholesome citta, then these factors are also made wholesome. If the citta is an unwholesome citta, then these factors are made unwholesome. And to come back to your question about the attention of number 7, mana sikara. Attention can be either skillful or unskillful. We use the words yoniso manasikara and ayoniso manasikara. So you can pay attention in a skillful way or in an unskillful way. That is where you can guard your sense door, by paying attention to the stimulus either in a skillful way or in an unskillful way. And then from that, consequences do follow. So does that explain that?
Yes.
Then we have after that a lot of unwholesome mental factors. The first four will always be found in any unwholesome state. The rest may or may not be found. We don't, I think, have time to go into all this in great detail, but after the unwholesome factors, we then have what are called beautiful or wholesome factors. And these others may arise or not arise in wholesome states of mind. So these factors are what give some quality to the citta. Any questions on that? Okay. The third ultimate reality is rupa, material form. That is the same as the first of the five elements. And there are 4 primary and 24 secondary aggregates. And I think the last of these pages shows you the 28 material phenomena at a glance. The first 4 are called great essentials. They're normally designated as earth, water, fire and air. We're more interested in their characteristics, which are solidity, fluidity, heat and motion. Every material thing will have all of these 4 qualities in differing degrees. Something like a brick, the earth or solidity, rupa is dominant. But the fact that the brick is being held together and is not just disintegrating into dust shows the work of the second, the water or fluidity form of rupa. Or it also has the function of cohesion, holding things together. These aggregates which make up rupa are present, first of all, these 4 are always present, but then there are secondary or derived forms of matter which make up the rest of the items on this chart. And I said that the Abhidhamma is 2 things. It's an analysis and it is a synthesis. In terms of synthesis, this shows how everything is related to something prior to it. There is no state which doesn't have a prior cause. And the Abhidhamma explains this in 2 ways. One is the doctrine of conditioned genesis, or dependent origination, in which there are 12 links which are used to explain two things. First of all, the arising and the death of a being, but also the arising of dukkha, suffering, and the cessation of suffering. Then there's also one entire book of the Abhidhamma Pitaka is devoted to ways in which causation can take place. And you will find them listed on the fourth of these sheets. This is a very complex subject. I certainly don't have time to go into it here, but this explains every possible way in which something can be related to something else by way of a cause or a condition. In fact, many things have multiple causes, not just one cause for one condition. And this shows that nothing can exist independently. If there were a soul or self, one might think that existed independently. There isn't such a thing. Everything here has to have prior causes for its arising. And then the fourth and last of these ultimate truths is the truth of nibbana, which is difficult, if not impossible, to describe in positive terms. But there are two characteristics. One is to say it is not conditioned. Everything else in this world is conditioned. Nibbana is not conditioned, and because it is not conditioned, it is permanent. Buddha's last words were, impermanent are all conditioned things. But Nibbana is not a conditioned thing. The other term you can use is without characteristics. As soon as you start to ascribe characteristics to something in some way or other, you are limiting it. If you say something is very big, or very long, or very short, you put a limiting factor on that. And Nibbana cannot be described in those terms. So, that very briefly is a scan through the Abhidhamma and how it analyzes and how it synthesizes. The whole purpose comes back to trying to explain, first of all, impermanence. All these things which we've talked about arise and pass away inconceivably rapidly in a split second. And secondly, there is nothing which can be termed permanent like a soul or a self. So,
you're saying there's three baskets, because I'm very new to Buddhism, so 3 baskets of Buddha's teachings.
mm-hmm.
Is this the more esoteric one or something, or?
Yes. These baskets were not invented by the Buddha.
Yeah.
It was his followers later, after his death, who codified his teachings into the 3 baskets. In the first 2 baskets, we're using conventional language, the language of everyday intercourse. And that is, generally speaking, something we're familiar with. In the Abhidhamma, all mention of conventional terms is not there. All we have is these forms of abstract terminology, which applies to the four ultimate truths and the analysis of these ultimate truths into different kinds. Like the citta has 89 kinds, Cittasika 52 kinds, Rupa 28 kinds. As to whether it's esoteric, it is certainly true that this is not easy to understand. So it's not like reading. It does require some careful study. And I'm sure there are many very pious, devout Buddhists who never bother about the Abhidhamma at all. But for some people, it is a very useful way of trying to understand some essential parts of the Buddhist teachings, particularly impermanence and no self.
These are Sanskrit words?
Pali words. Pali.
Okay.
Theravada Buddhism
Okay.
uses the Pali language, which is similar to Sanskrit. So in Pali we have the word nibbana, Sanskrit nirvana. Pali Dhamma, Sanskrit dharma. Karma, karma. Very simple.
Okay, you said about the bhavanga, stream of bhavanga, which begins with conception, yeah? What about before conception, when there's eggs and there's sperm and they're wiggling around and they're alive and they've got
Yes,
cells?
there's no consciousness. There is simply material form, but it has not yet been transformed into a process of a living being. So, these ovum, sperm, they're alive, aren't they? they're alive,
Yeah.
but so other things are alive. What has to happen is at the end of one life, the thought moments come to a stop. The last thought moment of one life is called the chuti citta. That chuti citta is responsible for causing the arising of the first thought moment of the next life, which is called a patisandhi citta. If you like, you can imagine it like a spark jumping across a gap. And conception cannot take place until or unless there is the patisandhi citta. Otherwise, there's no conception. But that process starts off the flow of bhavanga in the new life form. And that continues on until the end of that individual's life. Maybe a short life, maybe a long life, but that will continue, except the bhavanga flow is constantly being interrupted when a conscious process of citta takes place. So some people talk about this as a subconscious. It's not really like a subconscious, because the subconscious is believed to be always present. Bhavanga runs for a bit and then gets stopped. Another thought process takes place, then it runs on again and then gets stopped. Also, bhavanga, unlike a subconscious, does not have any power to influence our actions. Subconscious is said sometimes to be responsible for influencing what we say and do. The bhavanga has no such power to do that.
Dharma Santana.
Dharma,
Santana. Stream of the Dharmas.
Would that
Maybe
be,
that's a Mahayana term.
if I've not heard of that term, would that be, I don't know, well, we're talking here about a stream of consciousness.
The stream of the Dharma is really, it was a river.
Well, that is what the Buddha talked about. He said human life is like a river, always moving on, always changing, flowing, 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 never the same from moment to moment, because all these mental and material qualities, that's citta, cittasika and rupa, are all in a state of constant change, arising, passing away, arising, passing away, from moment to moment. But they don't arise and pass away in a disjointed or haphazard fashion. Each moment conditions the arising of the next moment, which conditions the arising of the next moment. So you've got a connected stream, but you don't have anything static or permanent about it. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about the realms of existence.
Yes.
And whether they're actually, as it were, if one can locate them, sort of mental realms of existence, or whether they're sort of, to give the term, geographical. Do you understand what I'm
I
saying?
think I understand. These can be attained by a being in this world who practices certain forms of meditation. And the mind then attains states that we call jhana, rupa jhana and arupa jhana. It is also possible for individual beings to be reborn in one of these states. Whether there is a geographical location, I don't think one can say for sure. But one analogy is that you have a radio. The radio is tuned in to receive a certain wavelength. It's receiving radio 1. Radio 2, 3, 4, 5 may be operating, but the radio is not tuned in to one of those other stations. You can, if you like, retune to a different plane or a different wavelength, but you can only perceive one of these at a time.
Well, where was the Buddha going when he was going to this heavenly realm to meet his mother?
Yeah, he was going to I think it's the Tavatimsa heaven.
Yes, Tavatimsa.
Which is number 7.
Number 7, yeah.
So these are called heavenly or blissful planes. If you're what we call gods in Buddhism, it is beings living in these planes. These planes are very pleasant, very enjoyable, very long-lasting, but not permanent. So we cannot talk about gods in the sense of eternal beings who also have the power to influence the lives of other beings. These gods are just another form of being caught up in what we call samsara, the cycling along of one life after another, after another, after another. At the moment, the gods are having a nice time, enjoying themselves, but in a sense they're wasting their time because they're just enjoying the experience, but they're not doing anything to make any spiritual development. They're just having a nice time.
Yeah.
And when existence in that plane comes to an end, the next birth could be in a plane of unhappiness, depending on the unexpired karma.
But the question I'm asking really is, where is this plane? Where does it exist? I mean, if he's going somewhere, is it in his mind he's going there, or is it?
It could be,
Yeah.
but as I say, it may be that our senses are not tuned in to receive them. Like your radio is only tuned to one station, not another station. So,
Yes, in the Theravada Abhidhamma, I think it's the case that there are, it's built on dhammas, so 80 conditioned dhammas, and as you mentioned, the unconditioned dhamma of nirvana, and then say in Savasivada, I think in Abhidhamma there as well, where there's 75 dhammas. But how does that relate to what you've been describing in terms of citta and cettasika and rupa?
yeah, all of these things can be termed Dhamma. This word Dhamma has several different meanings, and it can get confusing, but in this context, all of the minute qualities or elements being revealed by this analysis could be termed Dhammas. So it's a very general term here, which covers every material and mental quality.
It's just a sort of, my understanding was that they can describe sort of ultimate building blocks or fundamental processes. But I just noticed with the cetasikas, you described there's 52 of them, and with the rupa there's 28. Nirvana is one, but that's not the 81 dhammas. The dhammas sort of.
I'm not familiar with this figure of 81.
Sorry.
I'm not familiar with your figure
Right.
of 81. Do you know where that comes from?
Various commentators. Perhaps it's just as you say that these cetasikas and the elements of rupa you can describe, perhaps they can be described as these fundamental building blocks or processes.
Yeah, that's what I think it means in this context. Dhamma does have other meanings. It can mean the truth, it can mean the Buddhist teachings. But in this context, I think it refers to the building blocks that make up bigger structures.
Right. Does all this pertain only to human consciousness, no other life forms? It's all about just human consciousness? Or human, it's just related to humans?
Yeah, it can also refer to animals and to other beings which have mind and the ability to reason, and also to generate intention, citta, which generates karma.
So you said there are four ultimate truths.
Yes.
So where does bhavanga come within that?
Bhavanga,
Yeah.
that's part of citta. It's another form of consciousness. Bhavanga.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It was a really